Welcome to Ask Dr. Change. I'm Dr. Linda Ackerman Anderson. I'm happy to have you join me today to explore how to seriously uplevel your leadership and consulting to transformational changes, all through conscious change leadership. Welcome to the next episode of the Change Leaders Roadmap Methodology series. Today we're focusing on Phase 5, Analyze the Impact. We're analyzing the impact of the desired state in many ways, doing a big gap analysis between the current state that's in place in the organization and the impacts of the desired solution that you've come up with in prior phases. So looking at the magnitude of change and whether or not we have clearly identified the work that's required to get this new state into place. This is a really important process. It really requires a 4-quadrant perspective so that we're looking at identifying the work needed to get that new state in place from a mindset standpoint, leaders and stakeholders, a behavior standpoint, what people need to do differently, a cultural standpoint, what is required or inhibiting us culturally in terms of norms or values, and of course the content, what it is that is going to be changed in the ways in which we operate. Really important to understand all 4. So the key activity in this phase is analyze the impacts of that desired state. The first task is design the process for conducting impact analysis, as we typically do in a conscious approach. So in this process, who will you engage to understand enough about that ideal future state to know from a 4-quadrant perspective the impacts it's going to have on the organization? Recall, we're always looking at what can we keep the same because it already works. What do we need to undo because it blocks what we are required to do for the future state? And what might we need to do first time because we've never done it before in any of the 4 quadrants? That's an important perspective. So in designing the process, who can speak to the 4 quadrants in relation to their knowledge or familiarity with the aspired future state? Then will you have a series of working sessions? Typically, that's what we do. Give it to a team to meet several times to talk about the magnitude and the actual impacts and questions and issues still needing attention in order for the future state to be implemented. And so what we're doing here is identifying the work we need to do. It will all be input to coming up with the implementation master plan, which is the core deliverable of phase 6. So we typically look at phases 5 and 6 of the Change Leaders Roadmap as an integrated process. Today, I'll talk about the first part of that. Recall in phase 1, when we began to look at the scope of the project, you did an initial impact analysis worksheet, and it was this whole series of check marks on things that will be touched because of the execution of this project, if done successfully. So we take that as a foundation for beginning to look at what needs to be touched, what actions are required, what questions do we need answered for any of the items we came up with on our initial impact analysis. Having gone through the design phase, we now have probably a lot more impacts to identify, especially if you've done a pilot of that aspired future state solution. That generates a lot of impacts. How many people will be affected? Do we have the same number of jobs? Are our cultural norms in place for this? Are people thinking in the right way? What is required in terms of coming up with a new structure or a new process or new technology? We've come up with the solution. Now, what's the impact of getting it into place? So the first task of phase 5 is designing the process. And what's critical there is ensuring we're designing how to also address the other 3 quadrants beyond the content of mindset, behavior, and culture. The next task is identify and then group the impacts you come up with. I've run this many times where the magnitude of impacts identified is huge. I remember getting a call from a telephone company transformation years ago, and they said, we've got over 750 impacts. What do we do? And so clearly the next step of identifying those impacts is grouping them so they become manageable. Because many times, if you look at them collectively as a group, you can come up with solutions that address many of them simultaneously. So we're grouping them by category. It could be human resources, technology, financial, structural, communications, any number of categories that will help you to group the impacts that you've come up with so that they're better managed. The next task is to assess magnitude of those impacts and prioritize them. So assessing the magnitude is sometimes we have a small degree of disruption, a medium degree of disruption, a significant degree of disruption, or what we call a showstopper. This is really important. If we have showstoppers, we typically need to go back and redesign the solution because how will we handle those things? And so we're looking at magnitude through that lens, and that helps us then prioritize among the many impacts that you have, how you will address those that are most important first. So we assess magnitude and prioritize. Recall in the design of your process, you're identifying who does that work, who has enough knowledge and authority to understand the magnitude of the various impacts and then can place them in a prioritization, which allows us then to sequence them. The last task of this particular phase, before we deal with these impacts in phase 6, is that we refine the desired state if needed. Again, if we have showstoppers, that's a task that we need to accomplish. What would be required there is whatever refinements we make, we actually need to do impact analysis on the refined design. So there's a recycling, a new iteration of impact analysis if we've actually changed the aspired design. One of the things we're looking at in identifying, assessing the impact is, do we have the capacity to address all this work? And how much time and attention is required to address all this work? So it has direct impact on an accurate timetable, an accurate timeline for how the project will roll out from here, moving into planning for implementation. And it also gives us a great opportunity to look at, do we have the capacity to take on this magnitude of work, given everything else going on in the organization, where we are in our annual cycle of work, and what other projects are at play at the same time. So it gives us an opportunity to step back and make decisions. So often project teams will say, we're so far along, we just have to plow ahead, and always then run into brick walls over we don't have the capacity, it's not getting done, or we're not doing a good job. So this is an opportunity for a great course correction to happen here. It's also a wonderful opportunity for wide-scale engagement. Why not get your users involved in impact analysis? They're the ones who are going to have to live with this. It's not to say that you're giving them control or authority over changing things. You're asking for their input. Consider that those that are greatest, those stakeholders that are most resistant to the future state might be the most valuable inputters to your impact analysis. Why are they resisting? What don't they like about it? What do they think is missing? Where are the weak points? Your resistors might be really important generators of that information. And then, of course, your fence sitters, what would they need to get on board? And your supporters, those that are enthusiastic or most knowledgeable about what the future state will require. Those are great audiences to involve in some way in impact analysis. Clearly not all of them. You might need to come up with representatives who are the ideal people to input to this process. They need to understand they are contributors, they're inputters, they're not decision makers. So setting the rules of the game for that engagement is absolutely essential. And so what you're coming up with here again, from your initial impact analysis to now your real impact analysis from a 4-quadrant perspective, is a lengthy list then grouped into topics that then need to be addressed, which will take us into phase 6. How do we deal with all of these impacts and answer all of these questions about making the future state most successful once we're able to get it implemented and fully adopted? So on to phase 6 next. I hope you've gained some value in thinking through impact analysis. This is not a simple task. It's a major process to manage and oversee its complexity, and absolutely essential to your success. Thanks for spending this time with me today. We'll see you in phase 6. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you gained some valuable insights for your work. Please send me your questions and challenges by going to askdrchange.com.